Introduction to Hermetic Science by Giuliano Kremmerz. Introduction. In presenting to the public this organic collection of Kremmerz writings, which a group of scholars of Hermeticism has compiled with the aim of allowing the reader a synthetic overview of some fundamental themes of the vast and complex Kremmerzian teaching, it has been deemed appropriate to precede it with some introductory considerations. Parallel to the growing dissemination of scientific knowledge, to which, in addition to scholastic education itself, numerous popular publications contribute, as well as the ever greater impact that technological advances, being the direct consequence and application of scientific discoveries, have assumed in everyone's life, one observes, on the other hand, an equally notable growth in interest for every form of knowledge that is strange, marvelous, and difficult to access. In a word, occult. There may be several reasons that converge in explaining such an apparently contradictory phenomenon. From a more superficial point of view, although partly true, occult publications, or, as is more often said today, esoteric ones, are the object of growing interest. They can be framed, as in the case of science fiction, within the so-called escapist literature, which is heavily consumed in modern industrialized societies as a palliative for the monotony that can arise from a chronometric planning of existence. In this sense, it is no coincidence that several widely circulated magazines intermingle, for the public satisfaction, authentic occult subjects with flying saucers, the famous UFOs, which, on the contrary, undeniably belong to the realm of science fiction. If one looks deeper, however, one notices that contemporary man's interest in such subjects appears often dictated by the need for a new faith to replace the traditional one which, for one reason or another, no longer satisfies him. To this is due, in all probability, the diffusion of cults and beliefs more or less institutionalized, of varying value and content, ranging from the religion of extraterrestrials, which constitutes the mystical paroxysm of so-called ufology, to various mystical circles orientalizing or otherwise. Some of the latter, moreover, are recognized for the merit of offering, at least out of respect for their affiliates, a method for arriving at the experiential verification of the contents of their respective articles of faith. If, finally, we wish to examine the phenomenon from the most serious and interesting point of view, we must specifically refer to this issue of the possible direct experience of supersensible reality. Only this, indeed, leads us to the core of the subject at hand, that is, to the study of Hermetic science. Certainly, familiarity with clear scientific thought has induced in the more mature and conscious modern man the insuppressible demand to consider as certain and acquired only that which can be known by virtue of direct experience. This demand, initially directed solely toward the knowledge of phenomena in the physical world, has ended up in many cases imposing itself also on the knowledge of those realities generally considered the exclusive domain of religions, which ask the believer to accept them through an act of faith. A notable indicator of this different attitude toward supersensible reality exists thanks to the birth of parapsychology, which proposes the observation, recording, and interpretation, conducted with rigorous scientific method, of various paranormal phenomena. However, parapsychology still approaches the problem from a limited point of view, since within it, the investigator remains outside the phenomenon, limiting himself to observing what occurs in the experiences of the paragnostic subject or sensitive object of the experiment, thus obtaining a merely indirect or incomplete knowledge of what happens. The principles and methods of parapsychology cannot, therefore, satisfy those investigators more committed to achieving, directly for themselves, with the same clarity with which one observes the verification of a chemical phenomenon in a laboratory, that purported supersensible reality proposed as an article of faith by religions. It has been fittingly highlighted that whoever has certainly and clearly realized this demand has also noticed that it entails another, by way of corollary, which arises from the following simple deduction. If the investigator, in the state in which he finds himself in most cases, does not have any direct perception of the reality he attempts to know, it is necessary that he transform his state so that it becomes possible for him, as in the case of a more sensitive receiving apparatus that captures subtler vibrations, to receive those perceptions that were previously inaccessible to him. We see, then, reappearing, evoked by a logical scientific consequence, the ancient precept of purification or catharsis as an indispensable instrument for arriving at the knowledge of superhuman things. The Kremmerzian teachings respond to both requirements demanded by a committed and conscious spiritual search, a system of doctrines and cognitive practices that lead to a direct experience of contents for those who are qualified for such studies. Furthermore, this very statement formulated here is, in said teaching, subjected to the personal verification of the disciple. However, at this point, it is opportune and necessary to dispel some possible illusions which, if not refuted, could lead over time to other bitter disappointments. Given the affirmed scientific nature of Hermeticism, someone might suppose that we are speaking of a common discipline that can be learned with the simple application normally required to master any branch of knowledge. Nothing could be more erroneous than such a supposition. It is necessary to realize, in effect, that if the invisible world is governed by precise laws, just as the physical world is, these are qualitatively different laws, which can be likened to physical ones only by virtue of an analogical relationship. Such laws, therefore, can be deciphered and applied only after an active cathartic effort that involves the entire being of the investigator, who must also be endowed from the outset with a particularly clarifying and penetrating intelligence. The reader himself, moreover, will verify the truth of what we affirm by the end of the first page, upon coming into contact with the difficult subject matter treated by Giuliano Kremmerz, who in any case must be recognized for the merit of having made the most visible effort of clarification and dissemination thereof, never before attempted. He, having been formed in the mastery of this high knowledge at the end of the last century, was able to accomplish, making use of the ideas and knowledge of his time, the translation into a modern, reflective, and, as far as possible, didactic language of the synthetic and unknown foundations of Hermeticism, that is to say, of that complex of informational data whose roots lie in the ancient cultures of the Eastern Mediterranean area, and which the author came to know through a direct apprenticeship, never interrupted throughout the centuries. Even so, every effort to clarify and disseminate such topics, and consequently also that carried out by the author, finds a limit in their profundity, for they open onto truly vast horizons, in the sense that they do not lend themselves to being the object of a closed and finalized verbal formulation. There are truths that the investigator must conquer for himself by fashioning, so to speak, the organs necessary to perceive them, which is why the language used to speak of them must necessarily be symbolic, analogical, and elusive. To provide a comparison of the intrinsic difficulty in dealing with any occult truth, one must consider the difficulty we would encounter when trying to explain colors to a person blind from birth. In any case, one can be sure that Kremmerz has omitted nothing that could be explained in accessible language, placing the profound findings of his knowledge at the investigator's disposal and maximally facilitating the intuition of the Hermetic truth necessary for his evolution. Naturally, the tastes, the interests, and the very mentality of the modern reader are generally different from those of the audience Kremmerz addressed, while the current scientific heritage has been enormously enriched. Therefore, some aspects of Kremmerzian language belong to an era that is no longer our own. But the intelligent reader will be able to distinguish what is essential from what is accessory, and will easily realize how, on the one hand, none of the Kremmerzian statements clash with our scientific acquisitions, while on the other hand, his work of dissemination and clarification retains its essential value intact even today, having already become a classic of such studies, without obstructing the path to possible later formulations. The compilers of the present collection hope that, despite the limitations necessarily inherent in a synthetic exposition, it will serve to provide the reader with a useful approach to many essential themes of the vast Kremmerzian teaching, of which, in its doctrinal and practical aspects, the CEF is the organ authorized by the legitimate depositary. If, therefore, the present compendium can serve as an effective introduction for those, especially the young, who approach these difficult studies, guiding them toward a knowledge that, contrary to what unfortunately happens so often, constitutes neither a false promise nor an evanescent mirage, its goal could be considered achieved. The call to the aspirants to the light. While the progress of experimental science toward the gradual conquest of the secrets of nature has come a long way in the last 50 years, knowledge of the divine virtues of the human soul has not taken a single step forward. Today, as in the past, as always in the light of the sun, among the common aspirants to the knowledge of the mysteries of the future, only two classes appear: the mystics and the false doctors of theories that are not within the reach of every mind. The mystics form immense legions. From the religious exaggeration of those who speak to God and the saints, to the prophets and the archangels, one descends to the evocation of the spirits of the dead. The pseudo-doctors, on the other hand, are those who seek, using the methods of ordinary experimental sciences, to speak with the appearance of doctrine about that which everyone possesses and of which no one is aware, namely, the soul of human creatures, rich in virtues and unfathomable mysteries. The mystics speak through Psychic Exaltation and Fall, published in 1897, under the incredulous scrutiny of psychiatrists who, mystics themselves of a young science, classify them as asylum subjects and as experimental instruments to show the public, which does not dispute the claims of these supposed illuminates of officially accepted knowledge. Thanks to questions of terminology, in their hands magnetism becomes hypnotism, the human mind or the thinking and volitional principle within ourselves has become the psyche, and under this name it has been accepted as an official element of medical experience. But how many of them, who possess a conscience, fail to confess that in the struggle toward this conquest of unknown arcana, they are always hoping and never arriving at positive conclusions? Nevertheless, the problem of the soul is always the most vital of all those that impassion the masses. Everyone wants to know. Everyone ardently desires to know what will become of man after death. The mystery of death is the boundary at which the investigation of human science, as conceived in clinics and universities, halts, but it is also the boundary that Hermeticism must take as a starting point to determine, if possible, with what tenuity of material the thinking self can free itself from the necessity of temporal functions. If the skeleton is still strong, if the flesh is still alive, the cells living, and the tissue of the veins elastic, what need do we have to pass through the tomb and be remade? You, O death, are the solution to the spiritual enigma in living man and in the guarded depth of his unknown soul. The initiate must conquer death, overcoming the slavery of the inexorable law. The initiate sets before himself only the problem of the continuity of consciousness, to cross the river of forgetfulness, the lethe, continuing without interruption the dream of integration into the divine powers. Experimental science does not answer the problem and, in the absence of proofs it finds acceptable, contents itself with denying any survival of the soul or of the psychic individuality of man. In this way, the door is open to religion and mysticism. For religion and mysticism provide what university science does not: the hope of a free survival in an environment of superhuman justice and ideal freedom. It is desirable that a word should unveil the truth. But the problem of the beyond will only be solved by those who come to know themselves, that is, who come to know the structure, anatomy, and chemistry of their own soul. Here I do not intend to allude to the investigations of so many who, in books and writings, have created volumes of wordy psychology to examine the predominant instinct within us, the moral virtues, and the way to conquer them. These are nothing more than preliminary inquiries, and this whole swarm of writers does not truly pursue the goal of examining the problem of the soul in itself, but rather in relation to the society in which man lives and to the morality, the supposed morality, of the society of the living, which are clear conditioning factors of man's success in social life. Science, from astronomy to chemistry, has done us the great service of causing us to repudiate all the petty ideas of a universal God made in the image and likeness of man, ideas which statues, paintings, and symbols have rooted in the traditions of the common people. The infinite universe, also inaccessible to the means of scientific assessment, cannot be represented even symbolically as an immense man, because man is the product of the earth, and the earth is but an infinitesimal part of the infinite universe. The only scientific concession regarding God is this: the law that regulates the universe in the most perfect equilibrium. This law is infinite, always and constantly the same, here and there. On the earth, in intelligent thought, outside the earth's orbit, in the gravitation of the visible worlds, and in the moral movements of souls grouped in society. This law is perfect because it does not permit violations of any kind. Thus, a miracle is impossible if it requires this law to be violated, and it is possible only apparently if it is the product of the same law, occurring for reasons still unknown to man. This law is intelligent because it gives and takes according to merit. It grants and withdraws with a justice of which man is incapable. For us, there exists nothing more than the universe with an inexorable law, with an order from which nothing can escape. If you wish to personalize this intelligent and inexorable law into the figure of a man, I would urge you not to mistake an idol for the supreme God. The universe is too immense to be reduced to a word and a human figure. When the ancient patriarchs of the biblical fable spoke of the inexorable figure of Jehovah, which bordered on cruelty and never on caprice, they meant to refer precisely to this universal law, regent and creator of all that is, whose soul is being, that is to say, the entity, which is to say, the immutable first substance and the variable second form. This immutable law is also known under the guise of the first universal intelligent substance, which springs from all forms of visible and invisible things. The ancient priests of classical initiatory religions never used definite forms to represent the first principle or the intelligent substance. On the contrary, they always abounded in plastic forms when they wanted to define the diverse moments of the creative act, or rather of the incarnation of the universal God. For a zoologist, a physiologist, or a botanist, the greatest concession they can make regarding a God is to admit nature as the single and sole divinity that can be discussed and studied. Now then, all the symbols and hieroglyphs of the ancient sages only tell us this: it has two faces, one visible which represents its manifestation in the world of the physical senses, that is to say, the nature of modern materialistic philosophers, and the other invisible which represents the spirit of nature, that is to say, intelligence, which is the law of all manifestation of nature, a force, an intelligence, an immense soul that makes the tree bloom, the water transparent, the mineral harden, and the sunshine, the intelligence that regulates all the manifestations that strike our senses is the invisible God of the universe, whose very manifestations are but positive proofs of its existence. This universal intelligence, due to the rational constancy of its manifestations, is the regulating law of universal nature. The conquest of powers is nothing but a right to obtain them by law. An athlete who exercises all day lifting weights has a right that precedes all those lazy men. A chemist who works intelligently in examining the bodies of nature has a right to prevail over all those who, in their entire lives, have never wondered what things the air is composed of. They fail, despite thousands of efforts, to straighten a piece of iron. Yet an expert blacksmith with energy inferior to yours will make the iron obey him. This is the right to power, a conquest within the law, not outside the universal law. Whoever does not understand this is nothing but a fool, for he conceives of power without the conquest. Is this concept, in short, a truly modern conquest? No one has plunged deeply into the study of the ancient priestly science, which through symbols and hieroglyphs has transmitted its profane secrets to us, and the Assyro-Babylonian and Egyptian priesthoods had no concept of God other than as a law. The secret, the great secret of the priests, was the knowledge of the laws of the human soul, through which they managed to conquer the marvelous powers that seem like fables but are not. Telepathy, levitation experiments, the accidental divination of things to come through dreams, the premonitory signs of things that are to happen, are all phenomena that already attract the attention of recognized science, but with incomplete results. This is because the phenomenon is studied when it presents itself, just as savage peoples have knowledge of solar or lunar eclipses. They observe the darkening of the sun or the moon but without explaining it to themselves. Instead, when dealing with cases of intelligent human consciousness, one must arrive at explaining the phenomenon, producing them at will. That is to say, for this knowledge of the soul to be truly and strictly scientific, one must study the laws that regulate it and prepare it for the production of these phenomena. The subjective method of conscious investigation into one's own self, both to develop intensity and to reap its fruits, always and constantly represents the preferred method for those who ardently desire to learn, to know, to progress. The goal of integration is man. Never lose sight of this. Each of your experiences must be conducted upon man. Not upon just any man, but upon yourselves. And furthermore, you must have awareness of every step forward and exact knowledge of the most homogeneous means to provoke a sensitive state that is out of the ordinary. There is a secret world that men glimpse, suspect, and catch by surprise in its manifestations, but of which they are unaware. To study it, it is necessary to study singularly the secret man who hides within us. Study the invisible secret world of the souls of the dead, of divinities, and of beings that have never belonged to the human species and live in another life. The secret world must contain all the sacred science of the ancient priests, the science that transmutes man into a living God. The secret world will be a work of reconstructive gnosis of the mysterious science of the Magi and will be dedicated to the aspirants to the light, that is to say, to those who, well balanced in their passions, pure of any desire to harm, rich in will and the desire to do good, will dedicate themselves to study, to practice, and to speculate in order to achieve it. The elementary parts that serve to straighten out mistaken or poorly learned ideas will be written and explained in a form accessible to all. The others I will make known in such a way that they preserve their intelligibility only for that moral and mental aristocracy that has the right to elevate itself. I only promise and maintain that I will hide nothing, and the great arcanum will be revealed to you so that the candidates for the great priesthood may find the confirmation of their aspirations. Charlatan philosophers and scientists of limited investigative senses must give way to a rational school of culture that will indicate the path to the masses, so as to mark the limits wherein the philosopher will join the scientist and walk toward the conquest of truth pro salute populi. Explicitly, the program of actions lies in the effort to improve ourselves and others in the knowledge of the individuality latent within us, applying the conquest to real life for the benefit of the less provided for, combating evil under any form of ignorance and arrogance. The priestly initiations prepared and shaped the human ethereal nuclei, the self-formation of intelligent humanity. The school attempts this today. The integration of powers is subordinated to the state of consciousness that aspires to ammonian power. It does not derive such supernormal qualities and powers from a grace granted by an unknown God, as religions preach, but rather scientifically studies the laws of production of such phenomena, laws well known by certain exceptional priests, founders of religions. It trains the virtual power of the living organism by provoking, through traditional practices, individual assent for the development of the integral individual. It studies psychophysical powers and directs their application in a way that is useful to human suffering. It is, therefore, a school of practical philosophy, whose proselytes have only one goal: to contribute to the development of human civilization just as it is conceived in a materialistic form, inserting among its factors of progress the exponent of the anemic and spiritual potentiality of all men. The Hermetic mission must be developed against ignorance and superstition, in favor of the masses who must be redeemed by the science of man. That is, an altar of human science against ignorance. To do good humbly and anonymously, to publicly and gloriously instill, wherever it may be, that human science will in due time bring complete order to human matter, establish peace among nations, and combat pain and the fear of death. You shall tell atheists that man is the sovereign of humanity and the wisdom of man, the queen of the universe. You shall explain to believers that God manifests in his creatures, as the tree in its fruits. You shall teach everyone that Hermetic perfection is a miraculous medicine that the gods and the noumena of Olympus, in mortal shells, brought to earth, among suffering and ferocious men, to heal their bloody plagues and turn them into myths whose essence Mercury distills from blossoming roses, and love gives to mortals if Venus, radiant, smiles. Giuliano Kremmerz. Science is for those who conquer it. What need is there today for the occult? Today, in the shadows, crime, falsehood, and deceit hide fearfully. All that is science does not hide in a temple and say, "I fear the light." The knowledge of every new truth is a stream that swells the sea of conquests for human well-being. Do you know something that others do not know? Write a book and explain yourselves. Consequently, I have decided to write to make myself understood and to teach to convey it. I will speak and write clearly so that you may understand me well. You only have to follow with faithful scrupulousness everything that is necessary for you to achieve and place yourselves in a condition to understand everything that I clearly write, and to speak as little as possible, not to argue in the face of the phenomenon and say like the ignorant, "I have not seen, therefore nothing is true." It is necessary to study, to keep silent, and to wait. It is necessary to understand well and to test carefully. If the experiment does not work, do not say, "The master is crazy." Say, on the contrary, simply that you have not understood and try again. Science is the bread of all. Science is democratized to the point of making chemists out of children. But men of good sense understand that until now neither integral nor infinitesimal calculus has become popular. And because the supreme reason of the science of the occult is the algebra of elemental philosophy, the sublime mathematics in its application to the reality of existing things, let me not be blamed for misunderstandings if brains unprepared for the abacus fail to grasp and catch the abstractions on the fly. I, in things whose nature permits it, will remain firmly on the ground, so that the less expert may understand me with ease. But having to also provide the path for those who can see further to understand higher things, I ask forgiveness when I resort to arguments beyond the reach of mocking myopes. This book is made for the many who want to prepare themselves and for the few who will know how to digest it entirely. Science for all but entirely for the one who conquers it. Magic, the magician, and the incommunicable secret. Do you have a clear idea of magic and of the magician? Magic is absolute wisdom. This is the synthesis of all that has been, is, and will be. It is a word that gathers all the attributes of divine omnipotence. If you give the name of God the value of the supreme intelligence that creates, regulates, and preserves the universe. Magic is, as an ideally perfect science, applicable and realizable, to religion, to politics, to the family, to man. The magician is the possessor, the living depositary, and the one who makes use of the science of God. This science is so potent that it causes him who has seized the divine secret to lose the will to speak of it. Furthermore, those who have arrived have done everything possible not to write the truth except in a form almost unintelligible to those who had the intuition. It is believed that the ancient priests imparted this science in the temple to all those who made themselves worthy of learning and practicing it. After terrible and long trials, it was given in degrees, with rites and ceremonies that our Catholic Church has preserved in holy orders. From this, it can be argued that those who taught this terrible science and knew its importance required qualities that the common man does not possess. Imagine for a moment that your children asked you for a loaded revolver, believing it to be an amusing toy, an alteration of the word mag, which in ancient Iranian means most perfect priest, wise man. Dr. Inkoss gives this definition of magic. Magic, considered as a science, is the knowledge of the Trinitarian formation in nature and in man and of the path by which the omniscience of the spirit and its control over the forces of nature can be acquired by the individual while he is still in the body. Considered as an art, magic is the application of this knowledge to practice. Would you place such a dangerous toy in their hands without failing in your duties as a father to your children and as a man to humanity? You will put a weapon in the hands of your children the day you are sure they will use it to save their own lives, not to do harm. The Master completed the education of the profane, gradually leading the neophyte to the priesthood. The high priest was the adept, that is to say, the one who had acquired supreme wisdom, the magician. Christ has epitomized all magical preparation in love thy neighbor as thyself, and in do not do unto others what you would not have done unto you. Whoever practices these two concepts entirely and knows how to keep silent is prepared to begin. A perfect uprightness of heart, a clear feeling of good, a complete aversion to producing evil, a great love for your fellow men, a conscience free from any stain, no desire other than the good toward others, no fear of the evil that may touch you while doing good. This is how the magician contains the saint and is worthy of that great abstraction of the good that is God. Eliphaz Levi writes, "There is a formidable secret, the revelation of which has already destroyed a world, as testified by the religious traditions of Egypt, summarized symbolically by Moses at the beginning of Genesis. This secret constitutes the science of good and evil, and its result, when divulged, is death. Moses represents it under the figure of a tree that is in the center of the earthly paradise and that is near and united by its roots to the tree of life, which is guarded by the flaming sword and by the four forms of the biblical Sphinx, the cherubim of Ezekiel. Yes, there is a unique, universal, imperishable dogma, strong as supreme reason, simple as all that is great, intelligible as all that is universal and absolutely true, and this dogma has been the father of all the others. Yes, there is a science that confers upon man seemingly superhuman prerogatives. Then, if this terrible secret exists, is it not to a saint that it must be entrusted? The universe and man in the occult doctrine. To understand well and clearly all the writings of occult science, of magic, etc., it is necessary to understand what the basis of the theory and practice of magic is. In magic, the concept of the universe is the synthesis of all that exists. All that is a unity, a synthesis of three essential elements: matter, life, energy. The great whole has a complete analogy in its parts. If you ascend to the top of the mountain and find no grass and no bird sings, do you think yourself alone? You, the stones, the air you breathe, the stars in the sky, are but one with the entire universe. Expand your human reason into the reason of the world, and you will have the sense of the world's reason. Your soul is the soul of the world. From this is born astrology, which is the word or logos of the stars. Hermes says in the Emerald Tablet that all that is above is like that which is below, and knowing this suffices to accomplish the miracle of the one thing. Study man, and you will know the universe. Study the universe, and you will know man. The universe descends to man and applies universal laws within him. From man it ascends to the universe, and there you will discover the hidden laws. Man has a soul, a thought, a tendency, a purpose. Such is the universe. The universe has movement, breath, evolution, return. Such is man. Everything is analogical, and the magical process par excellence is analogy. The sacred symbol, which one vainly attempts to explain through resemblance, is also analogical. Analogy is the law of miracles and magical procedures, and the study of analogy leads to the knowledge of magic or Solomonic wisdom. The vital current is one. The evolutionary and involutionary process of the action of universal life is constant. This force or vital current transforms itself through the medium it nourishes and animates, and acquires a new form. Pappus says, "Everything is analogous. The law that governs the worlds governs the life of the insect." Studying the form by which cells regroup to form an organ is to study the way in which the kingdoms of nature regroup to form the earth, an organ of our world. It is the way to study how men unite to form a family, an organ of the. Studying the formation of an arrangement among the organs is equivalent to apprehending the formation of a world among the planets, and of a nation among families. To apprehend, finally, the constitution of the universe among the worlds, and of humanity among the nations. Everything is analogous. To know the secret of the cell is to know the secret of God. The absolute is in everything. Everything is in everything. Methodical treatise on occult science. From all that precedes, it is evident that the definition of life, which seems easy at first glance, is much more complex than is generally thought. For men, life is the force transported by the blood cells which regenerates the organs. But this, in reality, is human life, not life. In fact, this force is nothing more than a modification of the air that encloses the life of all beings on earth. If one wishes to see, like the majority of contemporary scientists, the origin of life in the Earth's atmosphere, we can stop at that point. But the Earth's atmosphere, like human blood, draws its vivifying principles from the highest, from the sun itself. We can thus go back into infinity, but since our general scientific knowledge stops at our world, we go no further, and noting that the force of blood comes from the air, the force of the air from the earth, and the force of the earth from the sun, we say that life is transformed solar force. From what I have set forth, the analogical conception of all that is transformation in universal life is clear. Let us now look at man, as he interests us in a particular way. For some, man is matter. For others, he is matter and spirit. For the science of the Magi, he is the reflection of universal life and, consequently, trine in his formation. The body, the plastic mediator or astral body, and the soul. The astral body can distance itself consciously from the physical body, as in the adepts or perfect initiates, or else unconsciously and, consequently, suffering the accidental influences of the moment, as in any medium. When the physical body breaks, fragments, or fractures, the astral body takes flight and dies. If a man imposes his astral body upon that of another, he magnetizes him. Wishing as I do to establish and lay the foundation of what occultism teaches through a clear understanding of all that I shall select and publish, I will not enter into the analytical examination of the elements that compose man in the formation of the astral body. Spiritism, presenting to the public as a protasis to what we will subsequently publish, the information, definitions, and opinions on the occult sciences, I have not wished to write a book of spiritist propaganda, but quite the contrary. I intend to present in its synthesis the entire encyclopedia of mystery that is comprised within magic, the highest expression of human and divine wisdom, the key to the hidden temple of nature, wherein man draws closer to God, in conception and in work. Modern history will begin when a new chemistry analyzes and develops the anemic elements that constitute the individual man, and it will mark the end of a long night in which man has remained ignorant of himself. The occult sciences encompass spiritism as well as animal magnetism and theurgy, even though spiritism may be the sole and exclusive part, after animal magnetism, that interests those who admit neither wisdom nor truth that goes beyond the limits of their comprehension and authority. A French master, Ripail, under the name of Alien Kardec, gave the first great development to the popularity of spiritism, which has been dispersed through effective propaganda across all those places where there are people eager to converse with the soul of a dead person, or simple curiosity seekers who take pleasure in seeing a small table spin. Magic, a terrible, frightening name full of suspicion, can be said to have been almost forgotten in the face of the incidence of this phenomenon in fashion, which does not arrive as the mother of all human wisdom. Spiritism has had its fortune and success because it is more suited to common intelligences and is more akin to the doctrine of the militant Catholic Church, due to its idealism of the soul, of the spirit of the dead, and of the guardian angel. Spiritism teaches that man is composed of three very distinct parts: the material body, the spirit, the perispirit, which marks the bond between the material body and the spirit. This perispirit accompanies the spirit of man after the death of the material body. The spirit, or human soul, tends toward indefinite perfection by means of continuous reincarnations. Between two successive incarnations, souls are in interplanetary space and can communicate with the living. The medium, or intermediary, is the one who serves as a means of communication between the spirit of the dead not yet incarnated and the living. Through mediums, spirits can produce phenomena of any kind: intellectual, sensible, and permanent material phenomena. In essence, the medium is a creature who, by their privileged constitution, is chosen by the spirits for their manifestations. The practitioners of alien Kardec spiritism divide mediums according to the nature and form of their manifestations. Without debating the theories of spiritism, it is foolish not to bow before spiritist phenomena, or those obtained through spiritist practices. It is true that the best and most refractory to academic conversations, when faced with certain sensible material phenomena, have not been able to deny or refute everything. The fear of deception, confusion, and bad faith should not, for that reason, redirect the teaching onto a terrain of rigorously scientific and undeniable experiences. Officially recognized science, as it progresses in its knowledge, rejects the old names of forces and phenomena and baptizes both with new ones. The actinic force of Professor Thury of Geneva is a way of being and understanding the astral or fluidic body of the occultists, like the psychic forces proposed by Cox. Thus, I reserve the discussion of animal magnetism, following the preceding debates, to claim the attention of scholars regarding hypnotism. Wise Europe, she who makes and breaks scientific eras and fashionable science, has refused to accept Mesmer's experiments since the end of the 18th century, and debated those of Dupotet, Peisger, and others from the first half of our century, only to later be triumphantly persuaded by Charcot and his experiments at the Salpêtrière, which gave militant medical science hypnotism, which is one way of understanding animal magnetism. Official science recognizes this force in man, but it is neither determined nor accepted that this force is constantly put into action by an intelligence outside the active operating subject. The potentiality of said force is recognized in these acts, but mediumship is excluded. That is to say, the intervention of an intelligent spirit or an intelligent entity outside the exclusively physical or natural forces of the operator is not accepted. Let us begin, then, by not despising the occult, and let us recognize the existence of a force in man that is not apparent, but is capable of increasing its potentiality and passing from remarkable experiments to higher applications that belong to the domain of secret traditional science. Secret for unknown reasons, but which perhaps the very people who today cry out against the terrible word would maintain if they understood the enormous effects that said force, directed by one who holds the true key, can produce. Furthermore, the science of our universities, despite recognizing the existence of a force outside of those known, can no longer cast doubt upon this or any other assertion of occultism. To Balfour's criticisms, Crookes replied that the electrobiological force might have fascinated them and their friends, but not the mechanical apparatuses that had recorded the phenomena. Well then, can scientists swear that the force that fascinates and the one that moves the control apparatuses of the experiments are not a single force? And if this were so, would not the entire edifice of mechanical experimentalism come tumbling down? And would it not be better not to plant in weak brains an atrocious doubt which, even though it forms part of a most exalted arcanum of the secret philosophy of the Magi, I dare not formulate, for fear of doing irreparable harm? Coldly consider the exposition of the facts and the proofs, judge serenely, with mathematical exactitude and progression, and tell me how far the experimenters, initiated by contemporary scientists, can go. Everything I have said thus far is but the protasis of fakiric magic, the gymnastics of the astral body. Fakirs, practitioners of Brahmanism, who exercise all their occult forces to produce astonishing phenomena. The priests use them in the temples to strike the imagination of the faithful as body and force, as a guiding potentiality, active in itself, which can reach limits unsuspected by the majority of men, whereas it is an old matter for occultism, as the ancients knew and exercised it better than we do. The initiatic schools were operative schools. In the past, more was done and less was said. But let us return to the conclusion of this introduction regarding the argument of magic beyond forces in the field of intelligences. First of all, the name I have chosen for this instructional work is Initiation into the Science of the Magi, not only because the name of magic is the most appropriate for synthetic science, but also because of the abuse that has been made in the contemporary world of the words occult, occultism, theosophy, and the like. I will not discuss this abuse, and I claim the reader's full attention regarding the value and identity of Spiritism. A true religion for the souls of the dead as a moral doctrine, it is purely and ideally Christian, minus the successive incarnations. It establishes the Trinitarian formation of man, consisting of a body, an envelope or second fluidic body or perispirit, and a soul. It determines the disappearance of the body with death, and the continuity of the fluidic body united with the soul. It declares that a special sensitivity can be developed in man which, in one way or another, leaves room for the spirits of the dead to manifest. Mediumship. This, in a few words, is the entire doctrinal foundation of the Spiritists. A small table turns, a bell flies, a pen moves in the hand of a medium. This is indisputable. But how the table turns, how the bell flies, how the pen moves, that is the enigma. The profane observer says, it is psychic force, it is magnetism, it is radiant nervous force, it is electrobiological force, it is unconscious automatism. The Spiritist, on the contrary, believes that everything is the work of spirits who wish to manifest themselves to men. The ancient occult science, the science of the Magi, of which the evocation of the dead or necromancy is one of the most terrible parts, forbidden to neophytes, is in agreement with the former and against the latter. Not because a communication from a spirit to the living cannot occasionally happen to them, but because generally this does not happen. Always consider yourself one in the Trinitarian law like the universe, an active mental principle, a material form, and an activity resulting from these factors, intermediate between the two natures, material and mental. And as a consequence, death does not divide the physical body from an intelligent invisible body, and therefore the spirits of the dead do not exist, which means the real evocation of the dead is not possible, nor is mental evocation in the sense commonly believed. The error of the current propagandists of the occult lies in their haste to make the principles of the ancient sacred science penetrate the general public, forgetting that science is bread for all. But it is only for the one who conquers it. The masses have religions. Christianity, in its essence, is the religion par excellence, whose path the Spiritist doctrine can block neither as a religion nor as a heresy. What, then, is Spiritism? Two things. If it produces phenomena, it draws the attention of profane observers to the latent forces of the human organism, helps human progress, and fulfills its mission, because it moves from the parlors of innocent recreation to profane universities. If, on the contrary, it does not make chairs jump or bells ring, and tends toward obtaining a conversation with an invoked spirit that never provides proof of its identity, then it fulfills the mission of making intelligent people wonder if there is not another, less equivocal means of knowing the truth, and thus it prepares neophytes for the science of the Magi. The first mission is accomplished. Without Spiritism, it would not be possible to discuss psychic phenomena today. But the second is not, because someone who is comfortable conversing with the spirit of the Virgin Mary is rarely persuaded that he is a madman. On the other hand, Magic is the supreme science, that is to say, the highest reason of what exists and what is possible, the law of the sublime and occult mathematics of the entire sensible universe, and the magus must unite all the science and clairvoyance of a reasoning man with his saintly purity. In other respects, Spiritism is also rudimentary in its explanation of the unitary doctrine. In magic, the concept of the universe as a unity leads to the principle of unity of force and unity of matter, which some illustrious intellectuals have already glimpsed by studying outside magical apprenticeship. In this case, magic, which no progress of vulgar science will ever catch in error, determines so many forms of existence of the unique force of the unique matter that begins in metal and, from liquid to gaseous, passes into infinitesimal attenuations. Now, Spiritism admits an indeterminate fluid outside inhabited planets, within which swim and walk many generations of spirits, sheathed in the perispirit, thinking of nothing other than incarnating themselves. This accords neither with reason, which is science, nor with the traditional dogma of the Magi, nor with religion. Consequently, it is anti-scientific, anti-traditional, and anti-religious. On the contrary, magic popularizes the unity of force and matter in the vital or astral current, the great serpent of transformation, in which, as if it were a highly sensitive photographic plate, the smallest oscillation of a thought generates a form. The perispirit, for spiritists, accompanies the soul of man after death and endures within it, whereas for magic, the intelligent divine principle tends toward progressive attenuation until its interpenetration with God. Behold the Hindu nirvana. In space, where spiritists place only the more or less perfect spirits of the dead, science places all fluidic forms, all coagulations of the fluid of universal life. That is to say, the spirits of the dead, the astral bodies of mediums and wandering initiates, the elemental spirits or spirits of the elements, human conceptions, lemurs, larvae, and all sinful and incomplete creations. But leaving aside this perfectibility or lack thereof of form and force, on the other hand, the intelligent principles, as interpreted by the ancient Kabbalah, continue the series of progressions of the intelligences up to divine unity. But this is not enough, and the spiritists would like to know how the magus sees, how he operates, and how he enters the astral. First and foremost, by reasoning. Reason is the first torch that brings us closer to the truth. Then, by not deceiving oneself. Later, by compelling oneself to remain silent, without any pride, and without casting pearls before swine. Conclusion. They have mouths and do not speak. They have eyes and do not see. They have ears and do not hear. They have hands and do not touch. They have feet and do not walk. Psalm 115. Esteemed friends, in this didactic introduction, I have gathered in a logical order the set of definitions, opinions, and teachings that can best help you to understand everything I will publish in this anthology. To recapitulate, I have sought to clearly separate two things about which the masses are greatly confused. The pseudo-intelligent material phenomena that the human organism can produce under certain conditions of the nervous system. That is to say, spiritism. Absolute universal wisdom, the key to all sciences that no human progress will ever catch in error. Absolute wisdom which holds the key to everything that is, which tends to develop the divine faculty in man, and places him in relation with the divinities that are neither the spirits of the dead, nor abortions of terrestrial life, nor elements of universal life. That is to say, magic. For reasons of logic, magic encompasses spiritism, magnetism, astrology, alchemy, and all known varieties of the manifestations of occult forces within man and matter. Yet at the same time, magic comprises a high philosophy and an occult philosophical practice, which leads those who best understand it and know how to govern it to leave the world of material phenomena and enter the world of divine unity. In this second respect, magic is divine wisdom. Do you want access to this and all the complete audiobooks on the channel, plus the ebook version? Click the link in the description or scan the QR code in the left corner of the screen to access our library, where you can listen to your favorite esoteric books without ad interruptions, lock your screen, or use other apps while the narration plays, and even download the ebook version to follow along as you listen. Listen on your computer via web browser, or download the app from the Play Store. After subscribing, you will receive an email with your login details, password, and step-by-step instructions on how to access the books through the Hotmart app.